He easily found his target in the viewfinder. He could hardly miss hitting a house. Then he waited for a final command in his earphones. God, he didn't like this. He pictured the astonishingly pretty girl from Hamburg. Jerry was her name. So sweet, and what a perfect body. He waited, half hoping the signal wouldn't come. For Jerry's sake, for the sake of everyone inside. But there it was, electronic, impersonal as a stranger's funeral, a whistling sound between his ears, 2 short, 1 long. He took a deep breath, slowly exhaled. Then, reluctantly, he squeezed the trigger. Barry felt a slight recoil, less than a rifle's actually. The launch engine inside the weapon ignited. The first stage engine propelled the missile only about 20 to 30 feet, at which point it was safe for the secondary propulsion system to engage. His eyes followed a vapor trail of solid rocket fuel exhaust. The Stinger was on its way to the target. He heard a low roar as the missile accelerated to 1,500 miles per hour. Be safe, Jerry. The Stinger struck the estate broadside, a near-perfect hit. He was already reloading for the next shot.
Chapter 110. There were loud whooshing noises and then fiery, hellish explosions everywhere I looked. Chaos reigned everywhere, and death as well. French police and army personnel were frantically running for cover. A rocket or missile had struck the northern roofs of the villa, tossing slate, wood, and bricks from a chimney high into the air. Then a second missile struck. A third was only seconds behind. I had started racing back toward the main house when I got another surprise out of nowhere. A side door of the boathouse flew open, and a dark blue Mercedes sedan roared up a gravel path toward the main road. I ran to a police sedan parked on the grass, started it up, and gave chase. There wasn't time to tell anybody what I was doing, not even Sandy. I wondered how a police car was going to keep up with a souped-up Mercedes. Probably not too well. No, probably not at all. I stayed with the powerful CL-55 out of Cap Ferrat, all the way to the Basse Corniche. I nearly killed myself and maybe a few others on the twisty road, but I didn't lose whoever was speeding in front of me. Who the hell was in the car? Why was somebody running? Could it be the wolf? Traffic toward Monaco was moving, but it was heavy. The lights from a tow truck up ahead indicated that some poor driver had jackknifed on this winding road. That was my one long-shot hope. The traffic was slowing down the bends. But suddenly the Mercedes swung around and headed west. The sports sedan was moving very fast past an endless array of billboards and restaurant signs. And so was I. I rounded a curve and the whole of the bay of Villefranche-sur-Mer appeared in all of its inimitable beauty and splendor, the moon large and full in the sky. The city rose above the bay, which was filled with sailboats and yachts like a rich kid's bathtub. The Mercedes spun down a slick sloping hill, sometimes at a speed of 100 miles per hour. I thought I remembered from somewhere that the car had close to 500 horsepower. It sure seemed like it. Then we were entering the old port of Nice, and I began to close the gap behind the sedan. The narrow streets were surprisingly crowded, especially around the bars and nightclubs, which seemed everywhere now, thank God. The Mercedes barely avoided a drunken group coming out of the Étoile Filon nightclub. And then, horn blaring, I roared through the same crowd, the pedestrians cursing and shaking fists at me. The Mercedes made a sharp right onto the N7, the Moyenne Corniche, a higher road. I followed as best I could, knowing that I would probably lose him now. Lose who, though? Who was in the blue Mercedes? The way up was incredibly steep and winding. We were headed back toward Monaco, but the traffic was light this way, and the Mercedes was effortlessly picking up speed. The driver had known to go backward in order to go forward, much faster, at a speed the police sedan couldn't possibly match. After about 2 kilometers, I was pretty sure I would lose him. We were back in Villefranche, but the highest part of town. The view down onto Cap Ferrat and Beaulieu was breathtaking, and I couldn't avoid looking. Even at this speed, it filled my eyes like a painting. I couldn't let him get away, and I pushed the police car up close to 100 again. How long could I possibly keep up? There was a tunnel, dimness, then almost total darkness. And at the end of the tunnel, the astonishing sight of a medieval village perched high on a hillside. Ayres read a sign, and I wished I could go easy. Just past the village, the road became even more dangerous. It was as if the Moyenne Corniche were taped onto the side of the cliffs. Down below, the color of the sea seemed to be changing from azure to opal to silver gray. I could smell oranges and lemons in the air. My senses were sharp. Fear can do that. I was losing the Mercedes, though, so I made the only move I could. Instead of slowing around the next curve, I accelerated. Chapter 111. I began to gain on the Mercedes, and I kept my foot pressed to the floor. Are you suicidal? I wondered about myself. Suddenly, the Mercedes skidded all the way across the opposite lane. It struck the side of the mountain, a glancing blow, but very damaging to the car at that speed. Then it swerved back and forth on the road, across both lanes. It caromed off the rocks again. The blue sedan suddenly took off into the sky. It was airborne, falling toward the sea. I braked to the side of the road and jumped from my car. I saw the Mercedes hit the side of the cliff twice, then roll onto the lower highway far below. I couldn't get down there from where I was. Couldn't climb down anyway. I didn't see any movement from the wreck. Whoever was inside the Mercedes had to be dead. But who is it? I got back in the police car I had commandeered at the estate. It took me close to 10 minutes to make my way to the lower highway and the scene of the wreck. French police and an ambulance had already arrived, and so had many early morning onlookers. As I climbed from my car, I could see that the body hadn't been removed from the wreckage. Medical workers were leaning inside the car and seemed to be working frantically. They were talking to whoever had been driving. Who was it? One of them shouted,
"He's still alive! One male! He's alive in here!"
I started to run toward the wreckage to get a look at the driver. Who? Could he talk to me? I glanced back up at the Moyenne and wondered how the driver could have survived the long fall and crash. The Wolf was supposed to be a tough guy. This tough? I flashed my creds and the police surrounding the wreck let me move on. Then I could see. I knew who it was trapped in the wreck. I couldn't believe it, though. I just couldn't believe what I was seeing with my own eyes. My heart was thumping loudly, racing out of control. So was my mind, what was left of it. I came up to the smoldering, overturned car. I knelt on the rocky ground and leaned forward. "It's Alex," I said. The car's driver looked at me and tried to focus. His body was trapped inside the crumpled Mercedes. He'd been crushed by metal everywhere below the shoulders. Just awful to see. But Martin Lodge was alive, and he was hanging on. He seemed to want to say something, and I moved closer. "It's Alex," I said again. I turned my head so that my ear was near his mouth. I needed to know the identity of the Wolf. I had so many questions. Martin whispered, "It's all for nothing. Your manhunt is useless. I'm not the Wolf. I never even saw him." Then he died on me, and everyone else who was waiting for an answer. Chapter 112. The Lodge family had been taken into protective custody back in England. We all felt that if the Wolf suspected that the wife or any of the children had been told anything incriminating, they would be targets. Maybe he'd kill them just to be safe, or because he felt like killing somebody that day. The next morning I flew to London and met with the police at Scotland Yard, specifically Lodge's superior, a man named John Mortensen. First he reported that none of the survivors at Cap Ferrat seemed to know anything about the Wolf, or even who Martin Lodge had been. "There's a new development, a little wrinkle," he told me then. I leaned back in a leather lounger with a view of Buckingham Palace. At this point, I'm not surprised about anything, John. Tell me what's going on. This is about the Lodge family? He nodded, sighed, and then began. It starts with Clara Lodge. Clara Chernohorska, actually. Let me begin with her. It turns out Martin was on the team that brought a defector named Edward Morozov out of Russia back in '93. Martin worked with the American CIA, with Cahill and Hancock, and also Thomas Weir. Only there was no Edward Morozov. He was an unidentified KGB defector whose name we don't know. We think that it was the Wolf. You started by saying something about Martin's wife, Clara. What about her? For one thing, she's not Czech. She came out of Russia with a man called Morozov. She was an assistant to a KGB chief and also our main source of information in Moscow. She and Lodge apparently got cozy during the transfer, and then she was relocated to England. He had her identity changed, got rid of the records. Then he married her. How about that? And she knows who the Wolf is? What he looks like? Is that it? We don't know what Clara knows. She won't talk to us. She might talk to you, though. I sat back, shook my head. Why me? I met her only once. Mortensen shrugged. Then he gave a half-smile. She says her husband trusted you. You believe that? What the hell is that supposed to mean? Why would she trust you if you met her only once? Unfortunately, I had no idea. Chapter 113. What remained of the Lodge family was being kept under wraps in a small town called Shepton Mallet, which was about 120 miles west of London. Rolling valleys, lots of green countryside, perfect for hiding them, at least temporarily. The Lodges were staying in a converted farmhouse on a no-through road outside of town. The land was fairly flat there, and anything approaching could be seen for miles. Besides, this was an armed compound, heavily armed. I arrived at about 6 that evening. The inside of the farmhouse was pleasant, with lots of antique furniture, but I had dinner with the family in a cramped bunker that was located below ground. Clara didn't cook the meal as she had in London, and I wondered if she approved of the fare. I doubted it. The food was dreadful, worse than airplane fare. No mechana vetsa on the menu. I finally tried as a joke for her. You remember our breakfast in Battersea, even the correct pronunciation. That's good, Alex, Clara said. You're very observant. Martin said you were a good cop. When the meal was over, the children, Hannah, Daniela, Joseph, were sent to their room to do homework. Clara sat with me and smoked a cigarette. She took long puffs and inhaled deeply. Homework? I asked. Here? Tonight? It's good to have discipline, habits to fall back on. I think it is. So you were with Martin when he died? She asked. What did he say to you? Please tell me. I considered my response. What did Clara want to hear? And what should I tell her? He said that he wasn't the Wolf. Is that true, Clara? Anything else? What else did he tell you? I thought about telling Clara he'd talked about her and the children, but I didn't. I didn't want to lie to her. Probably I couldn't. No, Clara, that's all it was. There wasn't much time, only a few seconds. He didn't suffer too long. He didn't seem to be in pain. I think he was in shock. She nodded. Martin thought I could trust you. He said it was your flaw, actually. He would never say anything sentimental, not even with his dying breath. I stared into Clara's deep brown eyes, which seemed surprisingly alert. How do you feel about that? I asked. She laughed. It's why I loved him. She had things to tell me that night in the English countryside.